Turn my camera on. Perfect. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So thank you for joining us for tonight's webinar on early teal season in Illinois. We're going to go over some identification methods and a whole lot more. So I think this will be a fun webinar. This is a new topic that we haven't really dove into, too much on its own. We've done quite a bit of waterfowl stuff, but never stuff, focused on teal or especially on this early teal season. So we think you're going to enjoy this, but we'll go ahead and get started. So first of all, my name is Dan Stevens. I'll be one of your presenters tonight. And then with us, we also have Curtis Twellman, who will be kind of driving the bulk of this presentation once we get going. So if you have any questions, there's a Q&A or a chat feature down below. Feel free to use that at any time, and we will bring the question to whoever's presenting at that time, and we'll try to get that answered for you. We first like to always start off with just kind of a quick discussion about the federal duck stamp. It's one of these things that's really near and dear to my heart, and it's arguably, I mean, the greatest success story of modern conservation in this country, bar none. And it really goes unrecognized by a lot of non-hunters and a lot of non-waterfowl hunters. There's a lot of hunters out there that they know you may need to buy a federal duck stamp to go waterfowl hunting, but they don't necessarily know the benefits that truly does have on the wetland ecosystem at large. And so this was a program initiated in 1934 by President Franklin Roosevelt. But what's really unique about this specific program is how cost effective it truly is. Look at this next bullet. 98% of the cost of that stamp goes directly to acquire and protect wetland habitat across the board. I don't think anybody can name a single other government run program that is anywhere near that kind of fiscally responsible, that 98% of the funds generated are actually used for the sole purpose that program is designed for. So really cool program, really beneficial. You can buy these duck stamps online now. My favorite place to buy them historically is the post office. Every time I go to a post office, they pretty much always have them. If you go to a Walmart or a Bass Pro, Cabela's, where you buy your normal hunting license or archery tags or something like that, you can also buy them there. I have found in many cases those go pretty quick in those stores, but the post offices around me, I've never had an issue buying one at a post office. So it's $25. It goes to a great cause, and again, 98% of that cost goes directly back to supporting wetland and wetland habitat. And I just want to emphasize, while it's called the federal duck stamp or the federal migratory bird stamp, the amount of species that are kind of that receive tertiary benefits through this program is just insane. Just think about all the little amphibians and reptiles, all the kind of endemic plant species, all the rare plants that are in these wetlands. Illinois historically was a wet prairie. A lot of the central plains and the central portion of the state were flooded prairie. We've pretty much lost 98 to 99% of that wetland habitat just in Illinois alone. And so this program is hunters putting the basically the back of conservation, or the forefront of conservation on their back, funding it through these dollars generated through the federal duck stamp. So even if you're not a duck hunter, highly encourage you to purchase a duck stamp. It goes for a good cause, and the artwork itself is really quite cool on the federal duck stamps. But moving right along, a few kind of common ducks of Illinois. One thing we always like to push is when you see a list of ducks, it can sometimes be a little overwhelming. Like, oh, I don't know what that one looks like. I don't know what that one looks like. But if you start to look at them in the specific groups that they're classified in, they're grouped that way for a reason. And so the two big groups, kind of overarching groups that we have, are the dabbling ducks. Some people also call these the puddle ducks versus the diving ducks. The big difference between the two is kind of right there in their name, how they feed. So dabbling ducks are going to dabble. They like to be in very shallow water, usually no deeper than 12 inches or so. Where diving ducks, they'll be out in your big reservoirs, your big bodies of water, where they actually may, swim 20, 30 feet down to feed on invertebrates or other, deep plant life, that kind of thing, where these dabbling ducks need very, very shallow bodies of water. Now, that doesn't mean they're not going to use big reservoirs to loaf on or to kind of roost on at night. But when they're feeding, they want to be in that nice shallow water. So dabbling ducks kind of encompass a lot of the ducks that most people are familiar with if you're a non-duck hunter. So your mallard, and again, like we're talking about today, the blue wing and the green wing teal. So that's where we're going to focus a lot of that conversation. But we really like to emphasize that these ducks can be kind of put into groups. And these groups not only help you be able to ID quicker on the fly, but one of the big things is, let's say you're out hunting a big reservoir of water. You instantly can get rid of a lot of the dabbling duck species from your brain because chances are you're not going to see a lot of them. You may see one or two, depending on the specific setup, but a lot of times that habitat that you're hunting is going to kind of dictate what ducks are able or willing to come into the area. Now, this might throw you for a loop. It certainly did when I first started getting interested in waterfowl hunting about 10 or 15 years ago. I was always like, why is there an early teal season? Why are they so distinct from all these other duck species that we kind of just showed you on a list? Why are they so different that we're able to hunt them in early to mid-September? And in reality, it's just because of how incredibly early they begin their migration. And usually they're going down to Central America, and if we did not have this early season, we probably wouldn't harvest any teal, just because by the time that normal duck season comes, depending on where you're at in the state, October, November, those teal are already way past here and you're not going to see them. And so this early September season actually gives us a chance to harvest some of these teal. And what's even more interesting is largely your very early migrants of teal are going to be your kind of adult males. They are even early migrants, where those juvies, once they start to fly, they'll come down a little bit later. But that's why we have this September season, is so that we can still capture their migration and still get a harvest of them, even though we're only harvesting, a million or so a year on kind of a nationwide average. It gives us that opportunity. If we just stuck to the standard kind of 60-day duck season that we have in the fall, we would not see many teal harvested at all, especially in kind of the Midwest. So that's why we have this early season teal, which is a cool opportunity because it gives you a chance to harvest blue wing or green wing teal. And there's not a whole lot else going on. So you're not competing with deer hunting. You're not competing with fall turkey hunting. You're not competing with trapping, all these other activities that, many of us like to participate in. You get to go out there before all that stuff starts and get a chance to get out on the marsh and hunt some ducks. So kind of like I just emphasized, they are extremely early migrants. Now, Curtis, who will pop on here in a few minutes and kind of run through a lot of this presentation, he found this really cool paper based out of Illinois from 1985. And while it's a fairly old publication, a lot of the trends seem to still hold up quite well when we kind of looked at it. Excuse me, but the blue-winged teal have largely already arrived in Illinois as early as July 28th. Think how early that is. If you're not, hunting ducks till mid to late November, you don't stand a chance of ever actually seeing a teal when you're out in the field. And so again, this early season gives us that unique opportunity to harvest. And if you notice, this paper also kind of peaked the blue-winged teal migration September 8th through the 14th. And if we go back, what are our season dates? September 7th through the 22nd. So the managers really kind of targeted that peak migration period as the perfect time to hold this teal season. Teal are in pretty good numbers across the board. So it's not, a lack of population out there that would stifle harvest. It's truly just how early they begin their migration routes. Now, green-winged teal are a little bit slower, and they tend to sometimes hang up north, especially as long as open water, they're content with that. And what we mean by that is a lot of waterfowl migration stems as bodies of water start to freeze. And so a lot of us as waterfowl hunters, we're routinely looking at weather up north, way past where we ever live. But what we're watching for is, what are their temps doing? Are they getting to the point that all those reservoirs and all those bodies of water are starting to freeze? Because that's what's going to start pushing the ducks further south, and they're just going to be basically walking that ice line. They may find a spot. Okay, we're content, for a week or two until that starts to get really cold, starts to freeze up. Boom, it might push them down a little bit more. But I also want you to notice the peak migration for green-winged teal, according to this paper, is October 20th through the 26th. So quite a bit later than the blue-winged teal, but still nowhere near the peak migration for our kind of standard ducks. Like, let's just use mallards kind of as we did here in this example, which peak kind of mid-November through early December. And so you can just quickly see how early both these species begin their kind of migration routes. And this is another really cool data set, and I use this quite often. So this is called eBird, and it's basically a citizen science project. So anytime you're out and let's say you're into birding, this is kind of really what eBird is for. Birders will go out into the field, record all the species that they've seen that day, go back and enter them into the system, and then boom, we have this huge collection of citizen, public data of people reporting what they're seeing. And so they have this really unique feature on eBird that kind of combines all that data and creates these weekly charts. And so it just gives you a really good snapshot through the year of when to expect a certain species in a certain geography. And in this case, just kind of in Illinois for teal. And you can see we have quite a big kind of push in April. We have a quite a big population. But in this chart, you can see we marked the two red lines. That's basically today. So that's basically what we're looking for September teal. And you can see both populations are quite high at that time, quite abundant at that time, and that's when they're largely coming through. And again, it's just because of how early that migration starts for both these species.
Yeah, one thing I want to point out on this bar chart that's pretty cool, there's a bit of an inverse relationship between these two. So these
Mhm.
really similar birds, they're our smallest dabbling ducks. You'd think they do the same thing, but blue-winged teal, a few of them actually nest in Illinois in the northern part, and that's why we have that thin bar throughout the summer months in Illinois because we do have a few nesting here. Um, and green-winged teal definitely do not nest here, so that line disappears, but a few of them hang out all winter here. Blue-winged teal basically doesn't happen, so a bit of an inverse relationship that we can find blue wings in the summer, green wings in the winter, and green wings have a much more typical, they call that a bimodal migration pattern where you've got two definite peaks in the spring and the winter. Teal are such interesting critters that they don't really have that. They have a much more, it's kind of more similar to like a wood duck migration pattern. So a little bit different, but that's why we have this early September season because, like Dan said, by late October, the take is it's tiny. It's a fraction. It's just a few. I've only ever got, I'm thinking, two ever in my life during big duck season, and that's hundreds of mallards, couple
Yeah,
blue
yeah.
wings. So big difference. But yeah, with that, let's jump right into the star of the show, blue-winged teal. This is not the only legal teal that you can take, but this is the teal you're after when you're teal hunting. This is the reason the season exists, for the reasons that Dan talked to you about. And some of the things that I want to point out, first off, like most pictures you're going to see of blue-winged teal, these are spring blue-winged teal. Okay, this is not what these birds look like this time of year. They do look like that front one, which is a hen, or that one top that's circled. But they do not look like those beautiful drakes with the white crescent moon on their face. You're not going to see that this time of year. Blue-winged teal, like ruddy ducks and a few other ducks, they plume up incredibly late. So you would have to get a blue-winged teal at the end of our season for it to look anywhere near that, which does happen occasionally because the adult drakes lead the migration both ways. Sometimes the spring migration is so early that we can almost catch it on the tail end of our regular duck season, but not going to see that crescent moon right now. So the things you look for are an overall brownish duck that has a really, what I'll say is a generic duck shape. And this will become more clear here when we look at some of the slides of blue-winged teal in the air. But yes, they are small, but other than that, they have a completely generic shape. They're mostly brown, they're lighter underneath. One thing you'll notice with these birds is blue-winged teal tend to have a lot of light coloration right next to the bill. So even though you don't see that white crescent moon, if you look at the base of the bill on both of those hens, you see that little bit of white there. That is a diagnostic feature. Blue-winged teal also have a little bit longer, thicker bill than their green-winged teal cousins. Green-winged teal, which we'll see here in a couple slides, really small, stout little bill that's much noticeably smaller than the blue-winged teal bill. Now, when they are sitting on the water or standing, they usually are hiding that blue wing patch where they get their name. but you can see it just start to peak. I've got the arrow on it right there, the cursor. Um, Sometimes you can see that peak out even when they're sitting, but that's going to be much more visible when they're in the air. We've got a little sound here. This is Drake blue-winged teals. They've got a little whistle call that we'll listen to here. Pretty unassuming little whistle call. We didn't have the quacks up on here, but teal quacks are basically like a more nasal quack than a mallard quack, and I'll play this on my phone because I do got it here. So we'll go ahead. This is actually a green wing teal female quacks, but the blue wings and green wings sound familiar. So you hear the teal whistles in the background along with the meadowlark, but it sounds like a mallard crescendo quack, just much more higher pitch. So if you hear that in the marsh, good chance that there's teal nearby. Now, this
I'll tell
next,
you what, one of the first times I heard it before I had any experience with teal or with, learning bird calls, I did not even assume that was a duck. I assumed it was some kind of like weird frog that I never heard. Like it's one of those sounds that when you first hear that kind of teal whistle, it doesn't just trigger, oh, that's a duck.
oh yeah, as far as the drake whistle, yeah, not the
Yeah.
quack. Yeah, yeah, definitely. The for both teal and pintail have a whistle call too. Really, all the drakes, because that's one interesting thing about ducks is the sexes are different. They also make different noises. So the males and females make completely different noises, which is really cool. But this is an awesome video put together by our friends and partners by Delta Waterfowl. They are the waterfowl organization. We always like to toss them love whenever we do a waterfowl webinar or workshop because they're always there to help us out when we need it too. And they put together a great little video here. This is just like 2 minutes that's going to give you a little bit of a snapshot about blue-winged teal. And it's got some great footage of blue-winged teal early season in flight. So definitely pay attention to that.
Blue-winged teal are small dabbling ducks. The cool thing about blue wings, well, I don't know if it's that cool or not, is they're incredibly early migrants. They migrate all the way to Central America. Most blue wings winter in Colombia or Venezuela. And so, because they migrate really early and they migrate out of the US and Mexico mostly, we don't really get to harvest very many of them. To solve that dilemma, we created special teal seasons. So in southern states in the United States, we are allowed a 1 week, a 9-day, or a 16-day teal season. Basically, it runs over 3 weekends, and it allows us to harvest the species that otherwise would almost go unharvested. Even with the special teal season, we only shoot way less than 1 million. And teal, remember, are probably the second most abundant duck these days. So really early migrants. When we hunt them, we can't tell the difference between males and females when we shoot them. They both look alike. They don't get into that beautiful breeding plumage until January, December, something really quite late. So, and that's because blue wings pair really late. They don't form pair bonds until January, February, or March. And so there's no reason for males to show off and be in their bright, beautiful breeding plumage. So mallards you see most times of the year, they're in breeding plumage when you look at males. But in blue wings, they spend at least half of their year in an eclipse or non-breeding plumage. So to see them really beautiful, you have to see them in the spring or in the summer. So in the fall, it's really fairly difficult to tell a male blue wing from a female blue wing when they're flying. It's fairly easy in the hand. But really neat little ducks, early migrants, and the adult males that don't have anything to do with raising young, they're the earliest migrants. So down in Louisiana, where I reside in the winter, we get blue-winged teal showing up in early August, and when we do, those are flocks of almost all adult males. So the adult males get to the wintering grounds early and stake out their site. so to speak. And then the later arrivals are the juveniles that took a long time to get on the wing. Bluing.
Yeah, so a really cool video there and some really nice close-up shots of blue-winged teal in the early season as we see them, which can be hard to find because the photographers out there, they want to take picture at blue-winged teal when they're at their most spectacular, so most of them do focus on the spring season. It can be tough to find pictures of what they look like when we're after them, but they had some really good ones in that. But now on to this critter, which is also legal to take during teal season. You don't see nearly as many, but you're going to have a better and better chance of encountering green wings the later in the season we go. Because some of them are going to be early migrators, so I've got a handful of them to blue wings, but it's probably 10 to 1 blue wings to green wings for me personally during teal season. But what I'm looking for with green wings really has to do with the shape. And if you look at that Drake green wing on the left in flight there, it is a small little duck. I mean, it's a cute duck. There's no other way to say it. It's adorable. It's an adorable duck, and it has an adorable little duck shape. It's not long and slender. It's the exact opposite of a pintail. A pintail is long, slender, graceful, and a little green winged teal just looks like a nugget that fell out of a pintail's pocket. But so that shape is really diagnostic. They are even have a shorter necked appearance than blue wings, and look at that bill. Small, little, adorable bill. Noticeably smaller in proportion to the head than a blue wing's bill. And I put the arrow on a couple things that stand out. So when they are in flight, green wings are notorious for you can't see hardly any of that coloration. Even though it's a beautiful duck, you're looking at that, it's got a green iridescent stripe across its eye, chestnut red below that, really beautiful red speckled in the breast. You usually can't see any of that when they're flying. The only thing that I can see most of the time is what that arrow is on, that white bar that leads the speculum. So there's also a white bar at the trailing edge of the speculum. That is really translucent. It doesn't look that white in most light conditions, but that white up in front of the speculum that the arrow's on, that always shines through. And whether it's a drake or a hen, you can see that. That's about the only field mark that stands out in green winged teal. So that shape is really important. Now, if they're sitting on the water or standing, look at that vertical shoulder bar. That's incredibly diagnostic. A duck can be really far away, and that vertical white bar really stands out for whatever reason. So only on the drakes, but a great way to ID green wings at a distance. And here we have audio of green winged teal drakes, which is similar to blue wings, just a little different. Yeah, both of these Drake teal whistles, really easy to make if you get one of the little 6-in-1, which I should have brought mine with me, a little 6-in-1 duck whistles. Easy to make, anybody can do it, can't mess it up. Now, to be honest, calling is not incredibly important when it comes to teal, so it's not needed. But hey, everybody likes to play with a call, right? I know I do, so
Oh
why
yeah.
not? Right?
And
It's not
one
gonna
thing
make
I just
you.
want to point out, Curtis, that you kind of hinted at, but just didn't kind of spell it out. And, obviously with this webinar, we're focused on teal, but pay attention to not just kind of the ID marks that Curtis is pointing out, but why those stand out so much. Because it really transcends to other species too, once you start looking at, other ducks that you want to learn how to ID. These features that are high contrast, where you have a very bright color directly adjacent to a dark color, those are going to be the best field marks you can ever come up with. Because like Curtis kind of mentioned, when we're duck hunting, we are not always operating like all these pictures. They're perfectly lit. The sun is directly behind the photographer painting, these specimens with just gorgeous even light. nine times out of 10, when you're in a duck blind, that's not the case. You're getting, maybe it's backlit. And so you're only seeing kind of silhouettes or only seeing these very high contrast kind of field marks. So I just kind of wanted to emphasize why he's pointing out these high contrast field marks is because those are what's actually easy to see when you're out in the field. So again, we're focused on teal, but that same kind of logic transcends teal and applies to all the different kind of bird species that you're interested in IDing on the fly.
Yep, absolutely. And one thing I love to do too is take pictures or something from a distance where you really can't make out anything, and notice, what do you see from a distance? Because for me, that's a lot of times what I'm going to start looking for. Because if it stands out at a distance and I find that it's unique, there you go. Really, that's the only thing I need to know as a duck hunter. So instead of sitting there thinking, oh, okay, I got to remember this field mark, this field mark, this field mark, all I really need to remember is one or two little things, and I can really narrow that ID down. So really good stuff. We threw cinnamon teal slide in here. You're not going to get any in Illinois. If you do, awesome. And hey, if you do get them, you're not going to be able to tell them from a blue wing. So good luck, really, because they're going to look like that hen. Cinnamon teal, like blue wing teal, same reason, they plume up really, really late. So you're not going to get that beautiful cinnamon colored guy up there in the top. You got to go down to Texas for that. And I encourage you to do that. Beautiful bird, or go west. California, they get a lot of them. We don't get them here, and if we do get them, they're going to look like the hen, and 99.9% of people are going to just call it a blue wing. Really, the only way to tell them apart, main way to tell them apart, is the bill. Cinnamon teal have a little bit larger bill than even the blue wing, so the bill's stepped up. It's basically between a blue wing and a shoveler. And then they're overall more rusty colored. They have less of that white at the base of the bill. So now the head is more uniform brown. They don't really have any black eye stripe. You can't really see much white at the base of the bill. And it's a cinnamon teal. And that down here we have a picture of blue wing teal flying with cinnamon teal, just to show you. They have the exact same wings. They are the exact same size. They will hang out together. And that middle one, is it a cinnamon teal or is it a blue wing teal? I think it's probably a cinnamon teal, but really tough to tell. So really similar birds, and that's why in Illinois, even though we don't get them very often, you can take them during teal season because, good luck telling that apart if it does come in. And cinnamon teal, just because they don't occur here a ton, we're just out of their range. They're not doing bad by any means. They have a good harvestable population. It just mostly is not here in Illinois. And there's no sound with these. Sound like blue wings, very similar. So now this slide, this is how you really start to ID birds when you're duck hunting, because you're not seeing them sitting on the water probably or standing up. You're seeing them flying probably fast. And so what most people use is a term that birders stole from the military, and it's by looking for GISS, G-I-S-S, the general impression of size and shape. You'll hear old birders use this term all the time, and it came from old military expressions when they would look at a tank or some vehicle way far away and try to describe what that is, just using the general impression of size and shape. So look at these blue-winged teal flying here and notice the shape. Notice that they look very generic duck shape, right? They've got a tail that is mostly a wedge that comes to a slight point. They have very typical dabbler wings, which are large in proportion to their body. Their neck, medium length, a little bit longer than green wings, but certainly much shorter than that of a pintail. Very generic duck shape. That blue wing patch now in flight that we couldn't see very well when they were sitting, now it's hitting us in the face in flight. So this is one of the main field marks that we're looking for on top of just their general impression of size and shape. Look for that blue wing patch. Again, you're not going to see that white crescent moon, so forget about that. Look for this shape. Not only the shape, but look for flocks that are constructed like this. And we're going to see some examples here in a second, but teal tend to form loose flocks, and they change positions all the time. Nothing is direct. Whereas most of the large puddle ducks, your mallards, your gadwall, your pintail, they're going to fly very direct. And even though they will form flocks that sometimes are formed into lines, sometimes are irregular, they're always going to fly very direct. And it is a pretty diagnostic way of flight that we'll get to see here in a couple videos. Also, teal fly really low to the water. It's one of the only ducks that a big flock is going to come in so low that you actually don't see them. They can surprise you sometime. You just hear a bunch of things land in the water and you look out and teal have landed. Because you're looking up here where mallards fly, and teal aren't mallards. They don't fly up here. They fly down here, right into your face. So, different flying pattern. And that picture on the right is just a good size representation to show you they are much, much smaller than mallards. Less than a pound. 13 ounces, that's for blue-winged teal. Green-winged teal are average an ounce smaller at 12 ounces. So small birds. Mallards average 2.5. So much, much smaller, but the same general shape. Now here is a flock of green-winged teals, and remember what I said stood out, and look at all these, and what do you see? Hey, it's that thing that I said, right? It's that white little wing patch that's leading the speculum. It stands out in every single one of these birds. But another thing that stands out, if you're really in tune with that shape of the green-winged teal, which is a pretty squatty little bird with a short little neck, two of these birds really stand out that aren't green-winged teal. And it's because they're the opposite, another early migrator that you could see during teal season, pintail. Now, peak pintail migration is going to be much, much later than blue-winged teal, but you will see a few pintail during teal season. You always do. But look at that long, elegant neck. They don't have the big, long pin tail that they'll get later in the year this early, so you can't really look for that, but they have a much more splayed out big tail and just a much longer, bigger, sleeker duck that once you're kind of in tune with the size of a teal, really tough to mistake, especially when they come in together like this, because that makes the size difference very apparent. Now this next video is a nice little video to show you how flocks of teal fly. These are blue-winged teal. Look how they're always changing direction. It's like nobody's happy with their spot in line, right? They're like a bunch of toddlers and everybody wants to be the first to get to the lunch. That's the way blue-winged teal and green-winged teal fly. They're constantly racing one another. They look like they're flying incredibly fast because they're so small, their wings have to beat so fast. They actually do average slower than mallards. They average around somewhere around like 50, 54 miles per hour, and mallards are much closer to that 60 miles per hour. So they look fast, they're always changing position, they're low to the water. All these things make them tough to shoot. They also can help us in our ID. Now this next video is going to be the opposite. These are gadwall, but now watch how they fly. Look at that. Sleek, athletic. Everybody's happy. Hey, you in the lead, I'm second, I'm third. We're good with that. Everybody's good with that. We're just going to keep on flying. Opposite of teal, right? And so this is gadwall, this is mallards, a lot of times this is pintail, this is the large puddle ducks. This is the way they fly. Athletic, deep wing beats, very direct. They know where they want to go and they're not expending extra energy to get there. They're also probably flying high enough that they're out of shooting range and they're going to circle multiple times before they come in. Not these particular birds, because they're gadwall, they're going to dive right in and make you feel good. But if they were mallards, they would circle about 13 times and really test your patience, and maybe they'd come in, maybe they wouldn't. Yeah, we ran into a little. There we go. Now the next video. Look at these. Talking about teal coming in low. Here's some guys I found on YouTube teal hunting, listening to them blow their teal call. Now they're going to blow a mallard call a little bit too. But look at how low they come in. You would never even see them. They're below the tree line. But did you see those blue wing patches really stand out? Oh, look at this. Like teal have been known to do, they're going to come back again, and they're not going to be high. They're not checking out the situation. They're just coming in. Oh, they're leaving. Guess what? We want to come back and check that out. There's decoys there. They might have some cool stories to say.
You gonna kill him?
Teal are what you call decoy happy. They're like the opposite of pintail or wood ducks. When they see decoys on the water, they just want to come and make friends. Look at them trying to make friends there. So that's a great example at how low teal fly in. And again, they fly in those flocks that are constantly changing directions. Very diagnostic. Okay, now let's look at some still pictures of these teal in flight compared to some of the most common birds that you might see alongside of them in the early season. Northern shovelers are an obvious choice because they're an early migrant too, and they have basically the exact same wing as a blue-winged teal. Now their colors are a little brighter, a little crisper, and they are bigger than blue-winged teal. They're almost twice the size of blue-winged teal, but when you're only seeing one single bird, size alone can be tough to tell. The main thing that stands out on those shovelers, look at their beak. Obviously, they got that big shovel beak. I still remember the first time I hunted with a new hunter back in Missouri one time, and the first time we saw a shoveler, he said, "Oh, I see a duck, and it's got something in its mouth." And that's what you'll think when you see shovelers, because it looks like any other duck, but with something in its mouth. So see that big, heavy bill? Hold your fire. That is a shoveler, not a teal. Now, wood duck is another duck. We have it nesting here in Illinois, so you're very likely to encounter it. Now, luckily, wood ducks most of the time are going to announce their presence by whistling really loud, much more loud and much more clear than the little peeps that you heard from the teal earlier. Wood duck whistle is going to be a loud, like too-weet, or a really loud whistle that sounds like somebody blowing a police whistle. Not going to sound like a teal at all. But look at the shape of wood ducks. Because they have that crest, even when that crest is folded down like it is in a lot of those wood ducks flying, it gives their neck a thick appearance. So their neck looks much thicker, much more muscular, much more squared off than the teal, which are a very generic duck shape. The whole thing about a wood duck is square. Look at the tail. Tail is very squared off, especially on those three that are pitching to the right. You really see that tail from the back. That's super diagnostic of wood ducks. If you see a tail like that, woodies all the time. Obviously, the whistle's going to stand out on woodies. Wood ducks move their head a ton because they're used to flying through the trees. So that's another thing you'll notice is more than any other duck. They'll be flying around and they're just like moving their head all over the place. Most of the other puddle ducks, their head's very still. Wood ducks are looking all over the place, which makes sense when you think about flying through trees all the time. And then we got our blue wing, which again, very generic duck shape. These are spring blue wings. But it doesn't matter, spring or fall, it's that same shape. Very generic shape, slender neck, not long, not short, gentle wedge tail. Great birds, great birds. And like we heard in that Delta video, the second most common bird across our flyway. So not to be taken lightly that behind mallards, it's blue-winged teal. So if you don't take advantage of teal season, you're missing the second most plentiful duck that we have access to. So shame on you. You should take advantage of that. I know the mosquitoes are bad, but come on. So here's a little quiz bird. Is this a teal? I picked out this picture specifically because it is tough. This is a hen wood duck, but her tail is molting. She's lost her tail rectrices. She doesn't have that square tail. Her crest is completely folded down. You couldn't see that at all. If you were just seeing a single bird come into your decoys real fast, you can see where it can be tough. That's why when it comes to teal hunting especially, you see the super conservative shooting time of sunrise to sundown, which is robbed a half hour of shooting time on both sides from all the other waterfowl seasons, and that is so we can make more precise identifications. And in teal season, if a bird comes in and you can't ID it, you don't pull the trigger. If it's a good day, you're going to have other chances, which is the nice thing about teal. You can mess up on a couple, and hopefully you still got more flocks coming so you can try better on the next one. But there's no shame in letting a duck land in your decoys, look at it, and letting it go. That's much better than making a mistake, because I promise you there are going to be conservation officers watching, and there's nothing easier to get somebody for than shooting the wrong duck, because marshes you can generally see a long ways, and you can see somebody drop the wrong duck. Also, other duck hunters will tell on you. I mean, I know I've done it before. If I see somebody shooting ducks that aren't in season, that's basically robbing from all other duck hunters. So I'm going to go ahead and report that. So don't make mistakes. No shame in not shooting. Make sure it is 100% a teal before you ever touch that trigger. Now, let's talk about a few of these pros and cons, because I think this is important to mention. First duck season open, it's warm. One of the biggest pros about teal is the equipment needs are practically non-existent. You don't have waders, but guess what? It's 80 degrees. Go wade out there in tennis shoes. You know, you'll be okay. I've seen people doing it. It's not that bad. Most of the water you're hunting is incredibly shallow anyway. Like Dan mentioned before, teal puddle ducks, they need the food to be shallow. They need the food to be within 10 inches or so of the surface for them to grab it. So they're looking for the newest water that's in the newest veg so they can go in there and get food, and it's easy picking. That also means it's easy for us. Shallow water, warm weather. The biggest thing we have to deal with is mosquitoes. Have your thermocell. Luckily, teal can't smell like deer, so spray yourself down too, because mosquitoes are definitely the biggest issue out there. You don't even need to call. Decoys, they are decoy happy, but it doesn't matter what decoys you have. You don't need teal decoys. You can throw out mallard decoys. You can throw out any decoys you have. You saw in the video, what kind of decoys did those teal come in and land with? They were geese. So I don't think it matters. If you put birds on the water, teal want to come and meet them. So you know what? There you go. Easy peasy. Also, let's think about access. So teal season, it's a lot easier. Most of the places that do have drawings, a lot of them are open during teal season. Also, most people that teal hunt go the opening weekend, and that's it. So if you watch the weather, which we're going to talk about here in a second, if you find a good flight day away from opening weekend, there's a good chance you can have the marsh to yourself, or much more to yourself than you would during large duck season. So access can be a little bit easier. Hey, you can also try rail and snipe hunting at some places. So check your local area regs to see if that's open. But that's one kind of niche type of hunting that most people aren't doing. But if you are in an area where you can teal hunt and also rail and snipe hunt, well, maybe you can get that September trifecta there. Cons, we got to talk about hot and buggy. Yes, you're going to probably get a million mosquito bites, but mosquitoes got to eat too, I guess. You got to be completely sure of your ID. There's no shoot first and ask questions later. Not in teal season, 100% of your ID. Teal are super fleeting in nature. It doesn't matter how good your habitat is in the Midwest, and this is not Illinois specific. All across the Midwest, teal want to get from the prairie pothole region, which is the Dakotas and southern Canada there. They want to get to there, or from there, to their wintering grounds as quickly as possible. So even under the best circumstances, they may stop for a day or two, and that's about it. Under not ideal circumstances, they're just going to fly right on over and never even think about stopping. So fleeting by nature, also weather dependent. If we don't get a good flight day, we don't get it. You know, we get 16 days. I've been watching the weather. We'll see here in a second. We don't have any really good days coming. That doesn't mean you can't get teal, because teal are always moving. They're so amped to migrate. Some of them will fly against the wind. So there always will be small numbers, but it doesn't look like we're getting any big push in the next 7 days here. But maybe after that, we'll see. A lot less water and habitat during teal season, just less people hunting, so you know, a lot less. They're further back, I guess, in their progression. So they want to hit peak water levels much later in the year. So a lot less water to deal with. But look at this. This is a really great website that I use all the time, just called windfinder.com. So guess what? It's so easy, even I can remember it. And you can look through a whole week. So they've got 8 days there. And all you need to do is look at the arrows and where are they pointing. Right there, I'm circling the prairie pothole region, the Dakotas, up into Canada there. You could zoom out a little bit. But what we want is arrows that point from there all the way to us in Illinois. And wouldn't you know it, because of this dang hurricane, this whole week we've got the exact opposite wind that we want to get. So this is not conducive for a really good teal flight in any of these days. But watch what happens when we get to the very last day. Oh, look at that. Right up there in the prairie pothole region. Some of them, those teal are going to be moving and they're going to stack up right on this line because they're going to be stuck that day. There's going to be a mini fallout. If you know any duck hunters in western Nebraska, which I do know one, I'm going to contact them and say, hey, watch the weather on Thursday because it's looking pretty good. Now, we can't go any further than this until tomorrow, but I'm definitely going to be checking back because if that continues to push down towards us, we could have an excellent flight day towards the very last couple days of the season because there's a whole bunch of teal that are really itching to migrate that have been held up by these winds. And as soon as they get the winds pointing the right direction, guess what? They're coming. They're coming. Now, whether they stop or not, we don't know. They could go right on through. But if we just so happen to be so lucky as to get one of those fallout events where basically the line that stops them of wind pushing them south is somewhere right in Illinois, then right along that line could be some awesome hunting for a day or two. So keep an eye on that, and we'll be doing the same here.
All right. Well, I'll take back over. Thanks, Curtis. So there's a few things that we want to really emphasize with kind of post-hunt processing. One of the biggest one is, especially if you're brand new to waterfowl hunting, you may not even know this is a pretty stringent requirement that you need to keep. It's basically called the species identification requirement. And what it is, it just gives a conservation officer the ability to be able to ID that bird when you're transporting it back to your residence. So by law, we need to either keep a fully feathered wing or a fully feathered head. So a fully feathered wing or a fully feathered head attached to that carcass until we get to our primary residence. At that point, then we could do the rest of the processing. Now, so you can go through, you can get to basically what you're looking at here. We have a couple different ways to process birds, but you could get all the way to this portion as long as you leave a fully feathered wing still attached to the carcass. That's enough for a conservation officer to easily be able to identify both the sex and the species. And so that is a requirement. So make sure never fully process your birds in the field. Make sure you get them home first. Now, there are a few different ways to process waterfowl. And for me personally, I like to decide that before I hunt. I think it's kind of important how I want to cook this meal. If I don't have an idea of how I'm going to cook it, I normally don't really have any idea of how I want to process the thing. But if I already have, do I want to do a full roast duck? Well, then I want to go through and pluck the entire carcass, sit there and take out all the feathers, try to keep that nice skin attached like you see here on this right duck. This is by far my favorite way to do it. It's more time consuming. It's a little bit messier. Don't do this in your kitchen. Do this in your garage. Have a nice trash bag handy with a nice trash can so you can just immediately dump all those feathers, because those feathers are fairly lightweight and they're going to start flying pretty much everywhere. But that is by far my favorite way, because a lot of that flavor in duck is housed in the skin and in the fat that's kind of inside of that skin. So if you want the best, in my opinion, the best product, you want to pluck the bird. Now, let's say you don't want to do a whole duck carcass. You want to just take those breasts. You can do that too. My recommendation is to try to keep that skin still attached to those breasts as well. So you can basically just pluck the very front of the breast. Go ahead and remove those breasts with a knife, fairly simple process. And then boom, you've got two individual breasts that still have that nice skin on it. Sear that skin, get it nice and hot, nice and crispy, and then cook the duck. And it is by far my favorite way to do it is to keep that skin on it. Now, by law in Illinois, you are only required to take the breast meat from game birds. I will say a lot of the duck species have quite a bit of meat still in those back legs. So I do often, if even if I'm just breasting out, like if I get a mallard, I'm 100% going to pluck the entire carcass and try to keep it as a whole roast duck. Mallard's by far one of my favorite wild games of probably anything out there, and that's my favorite way to do it. You're going to get a lot of flavor and a lot of meat yield that way. Now, I do want to say we do have a wanton waste law in Illinois. So that means you have to do your due diligence to recover any waterfowl that you shoot, any game animal that you shoot. You have to do your due diligence to try to recover that animal to the best of your ability. And again, in Illinois, we're only required to take the breast out. But why I emphasize that is a lot of waterfowl hunters like to go to other states. That's just the kind of nature of the beast. A lot of waterfowl hunters go from state to state to state trying to follow migration. Other states have different regulations on the books. There are some states that do require you to take those back legs. So just again, always check the state regs. If you're, hunting a specific state or a different state. But again, for me, try to keep that skin on as much as possible. It's going to give you the most flavor, and it gives a really nice crunch and a nice way to display that meal too. That skin on top when it's nice and seared just looks gorgeous and adds a ton of flavor into that meat. But again, I want to re-emphasize that species identification requirement just in case it wasn't totally clear. On your way home, until you get to your primary residence, you need to leave a fully feathered wing or a fully feathered head attached to that carcass.
Yep, and one thing I'll say, just if it's hot and I need to do something in the field, personally, the only thing I'll do is field dress it. So I'll reach up into the cavity. You don't even need a knife. You can break the skin down towards the vent, and you can just reach up in there and pull all the internal organs out, and so that duck can start to cool down from the inside, but just leave all the feathers. Because hey, if I'm being honest, I like to age my ducks now for a day or two, 3 days, and leaving the feathers on is a better way to do that. You can do it right in your fridge, and there you go. It takes away that they're going to be feathered when you get them home. So you want to keep them feathered in your fridge while they're aging.
I like it. And we always want to emphasize, always make sure you understand all of the waterfowl regulations. We do have a lot of waterfowl webinars on our YouTube channel that have been recorded in the past, where we go very in depth into every regulation that you kind of need to keep in mind, that you need to know. So if you need more information about just waterfowl regulations, definitely check those webinars out. But one thing I do want to emphasize, especially about waterfowl, if you're brand new to, maybe you're a deer hunter, you're a squirrel hunter, you're an upland hunter, there are a few different credentials that are required for waterfowl hunting. We kind of started off talking about the federal duck stamp. So that's one of those. Another important one that most people are unaware of is called HIP registration. And this is an entirely free credential. It's basically a federal way that they track overall basically migratory bird harvest. So it's a free registration, but please make sure it's on your license. I've bought licenses before at sporting goods stores, or like Walmart is notorious for it, and I will ask for HIP registration. And any waterfowl hunter knows that when you select HIP registration, it's automatically going to populate with a few questions that you're supposed to ask the consumer. And that we say, it's basically, how many days did you spend duck hunting? How many geese did you kill? How many snow geese did you kill? How many ducks did you kill last year? A lot of times they won't ask you those questions. And a lot of times that's because they probably didn't add HIP registration to your license. So always make sure you have that HIP registration. And then the other one is a state waterfowl habitat stamp. So that's a $15 stamp. It's not a physical stamp like the federal duck stamp can be. It's just another line item on your license. So to hunt waterfowl in Illinois, you need a base hunting license, you need a federal duck stamp, you need HIP registration, and then you also need that state waterfowl electronic stamp. One more thing I'll bring up about the federal duck stamp. When you attach it, there's a space on your license that will say place migratory bird stamp here. Put the stamp physically attached to that license, but you need to sign over the face of that stamp. That's basically what validates it and makes it legal. If you do not sign for it, you technically could be in violation. So just make sure you'll have a signature on the license itself, and then you'll have a signature over the face of your duck stamp.
Yeah, and one thing quick about HIP registration is they'll ask you, it's like categories. So they won't ask you like how many blue-winged teal, how many green-winged teal, how many canvasbacks. It'll just be like how many ducks. Is it, I think it's like 0 to 5, 5 to 10 or
Yeah.
something, 10 to 30 or 30 and over. So it's, you just got to know basics. They're not gonna, you don't need to bring an exact printout of everything you got or
And
anything.
if it's your first year too, the very first question will be, did you hunt migratory birds last year? And if you did not, then you say no, and that will be the only question you'll be prompted.
Yep.
And one other thing, we kind of started off with a conversation about, the federal duck stamp and how fundamentally important that is to the way we manage wetlands in this country. Another big one that we would really like to push, and you'll notice a lot of these big conservation legislation initiatives were roughly around the same time. The 1930s was kind of the dawn of modern conservation, especially 1937. A lot happened that year. But this is essentially what's known as the Federal Aid in Wildlife Restoration Act. It's more kind of commonly known as the Pittman-Robertson Act by the two individuals who put forth the legislation first. But essentially, what this is an excise tax that's placed on firearms, on ammunition, and on archery equipment. So every time you go buy a firearm, every time you go buy a box of shotgun shells, every time you go buy a box of 45 rounds for your handgun, you are directly supporting conservation without even realizing it. And what's really unique about this kind of funding mechanism is it's taxed at the manufacturer's level. So once that manufacturer produces that item and that item leaves their warehouse, that's when they pay the tax. Now, obviously, I guarantee it, all these manufacturers, they're passing that tax on to us as consumers. But again, it's hunters and shooting sports enthusiasts as kind of the backbone of funding of conservation management in this country. What's really unique about this too, in addition to just kind of the funding mechanism itself, is this money is allocated by the U.S. Department of Interior. Largely, a lot of government funds go to the U.S. Department of Treasury, get gobbled up by the machine, and just divvied out to various, infrastructure projects, whatever. But this goes to the U.S. Secretary of Interior, who's in charge of that department, which is your parks, your National Park Service, your U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And what's really unique is when they crafted this legislation, they were very careful. They put very specific requirements on how these funds can be utilized. And for our benefit, it's basically all to expand and to create better hunting, better shooting opportunities, and better wildlife opportunities for, whether it's habitat, whether it's wildlife research. But these funds have very specific use cases. So again, we just really like to emphasize the important role that hunters play. Obviously, we talk quite a bit on kind of the biologic side and how hunting is used as this kind of population management tool. But on the funding side, the backbone of funding of conservation and the management of our natural resources in this country is the backbone of hunters. And now I know obviously there's a lot of shooting sports enthusiasts who are paying in to Pittman Robertson dollars every time they go buy ammunition or a new firearm. But I want to also emphasize, how do they decide how much each individual state is allocated from, this total pot of money at the national level? And so this legislation has a fairly simple formula that looks at the total land mass of the state and then the number of hunting licenses sold that specific year. And that's how they divvy it out amongst the states. So not only are hunters buying this equipment that's taxed through this excise tax, but every time we buy a hunting license, we're creating more and more and more, a bigger piece of that overall kind of national pie. So really good stuff. But with that, oh, I think we did well, ending right at 6:30. Again, thanks for coming. I don't know if Curtis, if you have anything to kind of wrap up with, but I think that's all I've got on my end.
Oh, not really. Just, one thing I want to say about teal is for folks that want to give waterfowl hunting a try, teal is the perfect kind of, what do you want to call it, step into waterfowl that's going to be a much gentler step than most waterfowl hunting. So definitely keep a lookout for it. And the good thing about it is they're fleeting in every which way. So your hunts are generally pretty easy and pretty quick too. You're finding shallow, fresh water, and hopefully it's not that far of a walk, and then you're hunting in the shallow water. But teal flights notoriously early in the morning and late at night, and that's all you get. So once the sun gets high in the sky, you're usually done. So a thing you can do before work, before class if you're in college.